Hello, and welcome to the Folklore and Fiction podcast. My name is Kelly MacCath-Moran. I'm a PhD candidate in the Folklore department at Memorial University of Newfoundland, and I'm also a speculative fiction writer under the pseudonym C.S. MacCath. The Folklore and Fiction podcast and dispatch synthesize these passions with a focus on folklore scholarship aimed at storytellers. You'll find the Folklore and Fiction archive, along with the rest of my work, online at folkloreandfiction.com. Interested listeners will find a link to the current dispatch in the show notes, where a more comprehensive record of this episode can be found, including a bibliography and other references. This episode is the first animism, folklore, and storytelling supplement of the Folklore and Fiction podcast. In late February, I mentioned to followers of my Facebook page that I was planning to explore intersections between folklore, ecological activism, animism, and climate change, all with the needs of storytellers in mind. Animism, folklore, and storytelling is part of this plan, a sandbox for testing these intersections before I write the folklore and fiction material into a book series. Not everything in my queue is a good fit for the supplement, so sometimes I'll release a whole dispatch and podcast, sometimes I'll tack a paragraph or two onto the monthly offering, and sometimes I won't include anything at all. That said, folk narrative is a rich repository of motifs, plots, and themes related to these topics, so I hope you'll find the discussions interesting, if irregular. My interest in ecological issues runs deep on both the folklore and fiction sides of my work. I've been researching expressive culture in the animal rights movement for about 3 years, and my dissertation in progress is based on that research. I also joined the Climate Fiction Writers League in December of last year because so much of my writing contains ecological themes, and I'll be sharing a bit of that writing with you on the summer solstice. Beneath this work is my fundamental belief that the earth is sacred and deserving of respect, not as a natural resource, but as a place of relationship, where our needs as stewards must be kept in equilibrium with the needs of other species and the ecosystems they inhabit. As a sacred art, storytelling can support this relationship by creating connections between the natural world and its human denizens, in ways that inspire, move, and warn us. The backbone and guiding principle of this supplement is animism, so I'll begin with a definition from Graham Harvey, noted scholar of religious studies and researcher of the topic. He writes that, quote, "Animists are people who recognize that the world is full of persons, only some of whom are human, and that life is always lived in relationship with others. In reality, there are no individuals, with apologies to Monty Python's Brian. There are only relatives and acts of relating," end quote. With this idea of relatives and relating in mind, 2 motifs listed under ATU 780, the singing bone, caught my eye this month. Here they are again for your reference. Quote, E631, reincarnation in plant, tree growing from grave. And E632, reincarnation as musical instrument, the singing bone, a musical instrument made from the bones of a murdered person or from a tree growing from the grave, speaks and tells of the crime. End quote. I'll be riffing on the person/tree connection in this supplement, and while these motifs are a great starting point for that discussion, there are 4 additional motifs worth mentioning, since they can be found in my examples. These are, quote, D212.3, transformation, woman to lotus. D950, magic tree. F811.20, bleeding tree, blood drops when tree is cut, and R49.1, captivity in tree. There are a few interesting elements of the first 2 motifs to note from the perspective of relationship between Harvey's human and This episode of the Folklore and Fiction podcast is a preview, and you can listen to the full episode on the Folklore and Fiction website. Just click on the dispatch link in the show notes or go to folkloreandfiction.com and sign up for a free account. Thanks very much for your interest. Copyright 2019 to 2023. Kelly S. MacCath-Moran. All rights reserved unless Creative Commons licensing is specifically applied.